Welcome, everybody, not to Krown Countdown U, but to Campus Corner on CanadaWest.org. This is an initiative started by Evan Daum, the communications person with Canada West. It's a great way for everyone to stay in touch, not just with football, but a number of other sports across the Canada West spectrum. But what Gord Randall and I are here to do today are to preview the game coming up between the UBC Thunderbirds and Manitoba Bisons and the other semifinal between Calgary and Saskatchewan. So, Gord, let's start with Calgary-Saskatchewan. That was a crushingly disappointing season for the Saskatchewan Huskies, even though they pulled it out of the fire, rallying from 23 points back against the Regina Rams, who really broke a lot of hearts throughout the course of their year with 4 losses in the last minute of their games. How did the Saskatchewan Huskies have to approach this? Is there a way that they can sustain the momentum from that 38-37 game into this game in Calgary?
Well, Jim, I think one of the big keys for the Huskies is that they are going to have to put together a really creative game plan to try and take advantage of what few shortcomings Calgary has. And let's make no mistake, this Calgary team is not invincible. They can be taken advantage of. It's just a lot more difficult than it is with most other teams in the Canada West. For Saskatchewan, we saw a little hint of that, Jim, earlier this year when they came to Vancouver and played UBC. They really did some different things on the defensive side of the ball that, frankly, from what I heard from the UBC room, completely threw them for a loop because it was so out of character for the Huskies. Now, if they can do that and be a little braver here, because I think one of the biggest issues that we saw from the Huskies this year is they just seemed a little bit stale a lot of the time, don't you think?
Well, they didn't finish drives. And, you know, Drew Burko is one of the best quarterbacks I've seen in the CIS between his own 20s. He just had a mental block as soon as he hit that red zone. And maybe the break in that mental block right now is Kyle Siemens, the kid that started twice. Another quarterback out of Aiden Bowman, who has really got into the groove for the Huskies. That 520-yard effort against UBC in a losing cause was the most impressive start I've seen for a quarterback at this level, period. I just want to know, is it going to be the Kyle Siemens that we saw coming in against the Calgary Dinos for those 2 series where he served up an interception and looked like the training wheels hadn't been taken off yet?
Well, I mean, I guess that's a fair question, but it's a fundamentally different job for a quarterback when you are the guy coming off the bench and being rushed into action versus when you're the guy who's the guy. And Kyle Siemens is going to enjoy the benefit of actually getting a full week of preparation leading up to this, being the guy, getting all the reps, not having to worry about making the most of his 10 reps in team period while Drew Burko takes most of it. He's the guy. On the offensive side of the ball, I think for the Huskies that they really need to not bail on the running attack, and that's something that I think we've seen them fall into a couple times this year. Tyler Chow, not a bad running back. They can run the ball, but they don't naturally want to stick to that when things start to go south for them, especially if they get behind the 8 ball. And I really think they need to stay on the ground and try and establish that. Calgary runs a 30 front. Now, they've been very adept at stopping both the run and the pass of that defense, but versus a 30 front, maybe this is the offensive lineman in me, but you have got to be able to run the ball versus a 30 front no matter what they do.
Well, the Saskatchewan Huskies did something effective against the Calgary Dinos in that second game that we covered on Shaw TV, and that's they put a whole lot of guys into the box to shut down the running game. And Mercer Timmis, I believe, was held to 52 yards rushing in that game after a couple of weeks on the shelf. That being said, the secondary didn't respond with the type of game that you would hope against a set of receivers that just basically ripped a hole through them and had them playing on their heels for most of the second half. They have to come up with a better, more physical effort in the secondary, don't they?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's such a trickle-down effect when you're committing that many bodies to stopping the run, is that, and we have talked about this on our show with UBC this year as well, is that it demands a lot more of your defensive backs when you're committing a lot of bodies into the box and committing to pressure looks. And previously when Saskatchewan tried that against Calgary, their DBs just didn't hold up. It's tough. They have a big set of physical receivers at Calgary. Rashawn Simonides comes to mind, a guy who's a total matchup nightmare. And that's one of the big things for Calgary, is that when you do commit the bodies to stopping Mercer Timmis, then you have to find a guy that can go one-on-one with Rashawn Simonides all afternoon. And frankly, I don't think there's a guy like that in this Canada West.
Mm-hmm. Do you think this is at all a trap game for Calgary? I don't think so. The reason I don't think so is because of the Hardy Cup final last year, the 10 turnover game which absolutely blew up on Calgary. That reminder is always there for them. I don't see anyone stopping them at this pace, but is there at least a little bit of a trap here for them?
Well, you know what? I don't think it's a trap game at all, and here's why I don't think so. Calgary still, despite this huge run of unprecedented success at that school, still has not managed to break through and win a national championship. So all of their key guys, Andrew Buckley, fifth-year guy, never won a national championship. All of these guys have enjoyed so much success, have never gotten over that last hurdle. They've got to be a driven bunch, and they learned their lesson that you can't just cruise through Canada West play anymore like they were able to for a couple years there.
Well, it's always tough to beat a team 3 times, and that is a natural segue to UBC and Manitoba, the game that's going to be on global television, available in 98.2% of Canadian homes. This is a huge television event for the Canada West and all of CIS football. But I think the biggest change is Teo Dizar at quarterback. And I think if you give Teo Dizar that second shot against the UBC Thunderbirds, he's got a better than even money chance of finding a way to win on the road.
Certainly, and it just completely changes the complexion of that Manitoba offense. This is an offense that, while they can run the ball quite effectively, it's not designed. They don't want to run the ball 35, 40 times a game like they did this past weekend. And they split it between 3 running backs who all ran fairly well, but fairly well amounts to 5 yards a carry. When you're getting 5 yards an attempt in the air, that's not a good day, which is why teams more often than not like to use the run to open up the pass. And they just couldn't. You saw 168 yards passing combined between 2 quarterbacks, 0 touchdowns, 3 picks. That, I don't think, is going to win you any football games in Canadian football.
Well, I think some offensive looks, too, by Manitoba that we're not going to see in this game. That double tight 3-receiver set, you're not going to see this. They're going to try to open this thing up, I think, and turn it into a track meet. What do you think?
Very much so. I think it's going to be much more reminiscent of the first game between these two teams than it is of the second game between these two teams, which brings me to the other side of the ball, because I think despite the fact that Manitoba was never really in this game, one of the big positives for them coming out of this effort is the effort that they put together on the defensive side of the ball. And the UBC offense was at full capacity. Now, they may have been holding a few things back, but there were no major injury issues to speak of. There was nothing new from that UBC offense in terms of drawbacks. They didn't turn the ball over a ton. The Manitoba Bisons just did a really good job of stopping them, minus, I might add, their best defensive player, certainly up front, in David Onyemata.
Now, special teams are going to play a huge role in this. I think this comes down to Marcus Davis versus Jamel Lyles. I think it comes down also to Ryan Jones, the place kicker for the Manitoba Bisons, who's really picked up his game over the last 5 games, versus Quinn Van Gilswyk, who it wouldn't surprise me to see him being selected as a first-round pick in the upcoming Canadian Football League draft. I think the last guy that was picked in the first round was Brody McKnight, who was a kicker 8th overall at the end of the first round a few years back. Van Gilswyk can really switch that field on you if you get into those 3-and-out situations. We saw a bit of that in the third quarter, didn't we?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's funny because he shanked his first punt of the afternoon, but then we just saw some sparkling kicks out of this guy. Just beautiful-looking balls, tons of hang time, tons of distance. It was really impressive. And if I'm Wally Buono, I'm looking pretty closely at this kid. Can you tell I'm a season ticket holder for the Lions? But you know what? I really do think that we are in a golden age of special teams play in this conference. The Calgary Dinos have excellent special teams led by the CIS all-time point record holder, Johnny Mark. These two teams also, I would argue, are the best 2 special teams in the conference. And UBC's special teams numbers would look even more gaudy, except they've had 3 returns called back on penalties this year that would have gone for touchdowns. That would look way bigger, including one last weekend. There's a lot going on. They can return the ball. They have some gadget plays that we've seen in the past. We saw Quinn Van Gilswyk throw a pass to, I think, as you didn't miss on the broadcast, to increase his career stats to, I think it was 3 for 4.
2 for 3, and there was a completion to Taylor Loeffler. Not classic throwing motion.
Oof, no, looked like he was chucking a grenade.
Yeah, but he makes it work, especially for a kid that didn't play football until he was 19. So
yeah, I mean, he gets the ball there, and we saw some creativity on the other side of the ball with Manitoba running a really interesting fake where basically all 4 of their upbacks were onside, or 3 of their upbacks and the kicker were onside. They snapped it to the 4th upback. He tried to pop one up in the air, ended up turning into a can of corn that only traveled about 8 yards, but and didn't work out for them. But I love the play design, love the originality, and I expect that if they're showing that in a game that they generally treated like a dress rehearsal everywhere else, that they've got some more tricks up their sleeve yet as well.
Okay, prediction time. I don't feel comfortable making a prediction on Calgary-Saskatchewan because I think it just comes down to a point spread. I'm going to call Calgary by 23 in this game. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I see Calgary winning this by somewhere in that same range, the 3 to 4 score range. I hope Saskatchewan keeps it close. I certainly hope it doesn't get any worse than that. You know, I don't really want to be seeing a whole ton of the Jimmy Underdalls and the Bryce Harpers of the world this week, who are the backup quarterbacks and running backs for Calgary, respectively. I would like this to be a competitive game. I sure hope it is, but I see Calgary winning this one pretty comfortably, particularly on their home turf.
As for the Thunderbirds and the Manitoba Bisons, I'll tell you, when two teams are this evenly matched, I think it's a lot to ask a team, even if they're playing at home, to beat an opponent 3 times in the year. I'm going to actually say Manitoba by 2 in this one.
Stealing my thunder again. You know what? I did say in that conversation with Brian Dobie before last week's game that I do truly believe, and I think I've said on our show in the past as well, that particularly when you have back-to-backs in back-to-back weeks, it is the toughest thing to win both halves of that back-to-back. And you almost feel a little more comfortable having lost the first game as long as it was competitive because you are more driven for that second half and you have more things that you can clean up for that second half. For UBC, it's almost like you're waiting for Manitoba's adjustments in order to react to them instead of making those adjustments and attacking yourself. So for a relatively inexperienced UBC team versus a Manitoba team that is getting healthier and I suspect held a lot back last week, I really actually do like the road team's chances. Although I say road team, I think Manitoba fans actually may have outnumbered UBC fans last weekend out at Thunderbird Stadium.
Well, and there's always been a big contingent of BC kids on this Manitoba team over the years. If you take a look at the starters from the last lineup last week, 8 of the starters came from BC, and those numbers are relatively low for Manitoba. Usually it's in double digits, but when you look at some of those starters, they're the Jesse Walkers, they're the Jamel Lyles, they're the Evan Fosters. These are really big performers for Manitoba year in and year out that come from BC, so it will be a homecoming of sorts for them. You're supposed to disagree with me on these picks. It's better when we disagree.
Well, and the thing for the Bisons is that the aforementioned Jesse Walker and Jamel Lyles didn't necessarily make much of an impact on this game. Evan Foster had a big game, but those other 2 guys, those being the 3 most prominent British Columbians on the roster, I'd say, didn't necessarily make much of an impact. And I just think that there's a lot kind of working in Manitoba's favor here, despite the fact that UBC does get the privilege of being able to host this game in their home barn. So I suspect Manitoba is able to sneak out a 4-point victory, something in that range, maybe as many as 10. I just think that they've got that extra experience that we saw last year. They will approach the road game well. They've got some cards up their sleeves still, and they'll be fired up after losing to UBC last week and with their starting quarterback, Teo Dizar, returning.
So Calgary and Saskatchewan, that one's available on Canada West TV on Saturday at 1 o'clock Mountain Time. And the game on TV from coast to coast to coast on Global TV, 12 noon. That's a bit of an early start between UBC and Manitoba. For Campus Corner, he is Gord Randall. I'm Jim Mullin. Thanks for watching.